July 22, 1944. The air reeked with the acrid sting of smoke and rot, a stench that clutched at the throats of even the sturdiest men. Soviet tanks, their treads crunching the Polish soil to powder, splintered the rusted gates of Majdanek like the fury of forgotten gods. The vanguard of the Red Army, veteran wolves of the Eastern Front, battle-scarred by Stalingrad's icy hell and the meat machine of Kursk, advanced, anticipating the chattering boom of German machine guns or the plaintive scream of trapped SS fanatics. What greeted them instead was silence, an unnatural, stifling stillness that weighed down like a shroud. Private Ivan Petrovich, a lean Ukrainian farm lad turned soldier, was one of the first over the perimeter. His boots crunching over broken glass and splintered wood, his Mosin Nagant rifle held so tightly his knuckles shone white under the grime. The camp lay before him, barbed wire snakes curling across the ground under a bruised purple sky where storm clouds gathered. Barracks slumped like gutted cadavers, the spade of their doors yawning wide to invite the bunks, smudged with the specters of past habitation. But it was the stench that assailed first, a charnel stench of burnt bone and sour fat, combined with the whispery, sickly sweet undertone of Zyklon B residue. Ivan's guts rolled over. He fell to his knees, spewing bile onto the ground frost. Around him, battle-hardened sergeants and commissars were similarly doing the same, their faces contorted in disgust. These men had waded across rivers of blood, had witnessed villages scorched to the ground by Luftwaffe bombers, and here, in this frozen sector of Lublin, hell had been constructed by human beings. Piles rose all around, mountains of eyeglasses shining dully in the faint light, piles of women's dresses folded into awful neatness, and, God have mercy on them, serentines of children's shoes, little leather Mary Janes, battered work boots no larger than a man's fist, all bundled into a macabre quilt of innocence robbed. In the crematoria, furnaces gaped like dragons' maws, their iron grills still hot, speckled with pieces of bone that dissolved at the touch of probing bayonets. And the hair, lakes of it, cut from the dead and the dying, packaged for export to German factories to fill mattresses for the fatherland's comfort. But in this picture of mechanized bloodshed, whispers spread like fever among the ranks of the liberators. The baker, they whispered, glances flicking towards darkness, the one who stoked the flames himself. His name was Erich Muhsfeldt, a ghost in SS black, whose fingers had not only yanked levers, but capered with joy in the furnace. He was the crematorium commandant of the camp, the man who took screams and made them into silence, who uttered sweet nothings of fire to the doomed, as if speaking a lover's creed. And although the Soviets searched the barracks and the frozen wasteland beyond, Muhsfeldt had vanished like smoke through the cracks in the crumbling Reich facade. For the moment. What if I told you that this butcher-turned-baker did not merely preside over death, he directed it with a personal elan that made even his fellow hangmen shiver? That he briefly interrupted his slaughter to drink schnapps from a silver flask, toasting the harvest as corpses stacked like cordwood? Or that in a cruel joke of fate that defies the gods, his own death would reflect the tortures he inflicted, drop by agonizing drop? Before we fall into the depths of Muhsfeldt's psyche, before we find the boy who mixed dough and follow his transformation into the killer who mixed flesh, stop with me. Picture the burden of those shoes, each pair a stolen breath. If this story holds you, if it ignites the coals of indignation in your body, pass it on. Let the echoes of the victims radiate outward, and consider, what shadow from the underbelly of history should we pull into the light next? A whisper, a comment, your voice might unleash the next reckoning. Erich Muhsfeldt was born on a cold February morning in 1913 in the quiet Saxon town of Neubrück, where the Havel River lazily flowed through rye fields and the air was always filled with the eternal aroma of fresh-baked rye loaves wafting from the communal ovens. He was brought up by his father, a grim miller whose hands were hard from years of grinding flour, and his mother, a tailor whose fingers darted over cloth like sparrows, in a small half-timbered house on the outskirts of the town. Erich was an unexceptional child, a tow-haired boy with pale blue eyes narrowed against the wind forever, his build thin but wiry from lugging flour sacks to the bakery where he had apprenticed when he was 17. He quit school in the 8th grade, a haze of memorized lessons and playground fights. He learned dough rhythms, the knead, the rise, the bake. During the day he crafted loaves with the precision of an artist, his fingers puffed white as specters. Nights he sat in smoky taverns sipping watery beer and hearing the grievances of Great War veterans, latter-day invalids with amputated limbs and haunted eyes, cursing the Treaty of Versailles and the stab in the back that had debased Germany. He soaked it all in, not with the passion of revolution, but with a smoldering, private anger. Life was routine. In 1935 he married Greta, a rosy-cheeked village girl from the next village, her laughter like the tinkling of bells on a summer breeze. Their son, wee Karl, came a year later, pudgy-cheeked and cooing, a bundle of heat in Erich's flour-covered arms.
But normalcy is a thin crust, broken easily. January 30th, 1933, the day of the seizure. Berlin's streets went wild in celebration as Adolf Hitler, once an Austrian painter and now a prophet, took the oath as Chancellor. Brown-shirted SA stormtroopers marched through the streets, torches ablaze, their cries of Deutschland erwache rumbling like a waking giant. The local SA hall in Neubrück bulged with recruits, and Erich, only 20, felt drawn. It began innocently enough, a uniform that made him feel tall, the camaraderie of beer-fuddled knights scheming against the Jew-Bolshevik threat. He enlisted that spring, exchanging his baker's apron for a brown shirt, his wooden rolling pin for a rubber truncheon. The wages were low, but the authority? Exhilarating. For the first time, Erich sampled command, not over yeast and ovens, but over men. Wind the clock forward to 1937, and the SA's untidy rough edges had frayed. The night of the long knives had cleansed its excesses, and the ominous black of the SS called like the siren song. Erich moved seamlessly, his SA career a golden reference. The SS was no militia. It was Himmler's elite, the Reich's shadow knights, vowing purity and steadfast loyalty. By 1939, with Europe on the precipice of war, Erich took his oath to the Nazi Party itself, his right hand extended in the Roman salute, his heart racing with an ardor he confused for fate. The Neuruppin baker had risen, not on dough, but on the tide of anger. War broke out on September 1, 1939, in the shriek of Stuka dive bombers over the skies of Poland. Erich, 26 now, saw newsreels of blitzkrieg victories in smoke-filled cinemas, his chest puffing out in pride. But his glory was not in foxholes or panzer units, but in the blackened squalor of extermination. January 1940, enlistment in the SS Totenkopf Verbande, the Death's Head units. Their emblem a grinning silver skull and crossbones attached to collars like a mark of the damned. These were no frontline heroes, they were the Reich's undertakers, drilled at Dachau's dismal academy under Theodor Eicke, the pope of the camps. Eicke's scripture, discipline is the soul of the Totenkopf. Prisoners were subhumans, vermin to be stamped on without pity. Erich learned the curriculum as scripture, racial hygiene lectures, baton strike demonstrations against the kidneys, mock mass selections where unfit dummies were funneled to pretend gas vans. His initial assignment, August 1940, was Auschwitz I, the original camp, a reorganized Polish army barracks in Silesian forests. As block leader and head of prisoner work commandos, Erich mastered the black arithmetic of murder. Inputs: convoy cargoes of Jews, Poles, Roma. Outputs: quotas fulfilled, then disposal. He commanded the Appelplatz roll calls, where naked thousands shivered in the muck, their breath mist in the air as he spat numbers like curses. Transgressions, a glance aside, a cough, were met with the lash of his belt or a kick to the ribs. One evening, in the block's reeking darkness, a Polish intellectual leaned over to his bunkmate and murmured, "Sabotage." Erich, pacing with a lantern, heard. Morning brought the man's death, pulled to the black wall, a shot to the back of the neck. As the body fell, Erich experienced not horror, but excitement, a baker's pride in a well-proofed loaf, risen to perfection and ready for the oven. Auschwitz was training, a forge that tempered his brutality. Promotions were quick for those who excelled in sadism, and Erich's star rose high. But rumors in the officers' mess spoke of even worse to come. Maginot, a fellow SA man, whispered over Ersatz coffee, eyes flashing. "The Harvest Festival. You'll see harvests like never before." In November 1941, the transfer order came. Erich stowed his few possessions, a photograph of Karl and Greta, his SS dagger inscribed, "My honor is loyalty," and climbed the train east. As the cars clattered towards Lublin, he looked out at the pines passing by, their needles powdered with first snow. A feeling of foreboding awakened. This would be his masterpiece. Winter bit him in Maginot, its fields a white plain crossed by ruined watchtowers. Constructed quickly in 1941 as a labor camp, it had grown into a death factory, its 7 gas chambers masquerading as bathhouses, and its crematoria spewing smoke like factory chimneys. Erich's job? Crematorium 4's commandant. He took over a staff of capos, tortured prisoners who had become overseers, and a bookkeeping ledger of special actions. His office, a small hut looking over the pits, was filled with the scent of ink and ozone. There, he went through manifests. Transport from Warsaw Ghetto, 2,000 units. Selection, 400 fit for labor. Remainder, processing. The innovation came with the new year. Zyklon B, the pesticide turned genocidal agent. Early experiments were primitive, vans sealed like coffins, fumes of exhaust pumping death. But by October 1942, Maginot's gas chambers whirred with efficiency. Erich directed the first complete run. A column of Hungarian Jews, thin from ghettos, pushed toward shower block B. Naked and shaking, they hugged soap rations distributed with insincere smiles. "Disinfect for your health," the guards whispered. Doors slammed shut. From his position, Erich observed the vents fall pellets, blue crystals hissing into cyanide mist. Through the pier hole, forms writhed, a woman scratching at walls, a child pressed against his mother's bosom. 15 minutes, then nothing. Sonderkommando, Jewish captives driven to the dirty work, dragged the massive limbs to carts, their faces masks of numbed horror. Erich didn't merely command, he created. When natural attrition lagged, plague and starvation taking fewer, he thinned the lines himself. "You, the one with the limp, you too frail to lift." His voice convincingly gentle, like a baker barking orders. But his hands, those were the devil's instruments. He had a thick oak truncheon, smoothed from repeated use, and a leather riding crop that crackled through air. Survivor testimony etched in post-war tribunals describe him as a demon in human flesh. Consider Miriam Goldberg, a tailor from Lodz, her testimony a sword. He'd roam the barracks at evening, flask in his hand, schnapps sloshing. "Smile for me, Jewess, and if you did, he would break your jaw for ingratitude. If not, he would break it anyway." One turn of fate nearly destroyed him. In spring of 1942, in the course of a routine delousing, a desperate, half-crazy young capo attacked Erich with a smuggled sliver of glass. The knife cut across his cheek, wicking a scarlet line from eye to jaw. Erich killed the man with one blow, then commanded him tied to a stake in the yard. For hours, under a pitiless sun, the capo hung, flies buzzing his sores. That evening, in his quarters, alone, Erich outlined the scar across a shard of mirror. Not terror, but rage seethed within him. "They believe me to be mortal?" he growled at the vacant space around him. After that, the scar was his trademark, a fiery warning to all that the baker's flame burned everlastingly. But Majdanek's summertime atrocity gestated in October 1943, Operation Harvest Festival, or Erntefest. Himmler's command crackled over wires. Put down the rebellions at Majdanek, Poniatowka, Troniki. 3 camps, 43,000 lives. Erich's instructions: ready the fields. Prisoners felt their doom, dug trenches under floodlights, kilometers long, 6 meters deep, camouflaged as anti-tank ditches. Rumors circulated: the ditches are for us. November 3 was a gray dawn. At 9 a.m. the loudspeakers howled, Ride of the Valkyries, then lilting folk songs, a twisted soundtrack to oblivion. Erich perched on a knoll, binoculars to his eyes, as the first batches were called, women and children first. Strip, the order rang out. In the cold they complied, clenching against the gale, hands covering modesty. Machine guns, MG-42s, their burst sounding like tearing fabric, chattered from trench mouths. Bodies fell, layer upon layer, blood seeping into mud. At noon, the pits were full. Erich came down, boots squelching in the mire. A survivor, who had been concealed in a drainage culvert, later testified. He laughed, not deranged laughter, but happy, like a carnival man. He reloaded pistols himself, shooting the wounded who moved. 4,000 cartridges per gun, fired in salvos. At dusk, the ground creaked under its weight. Erich counted the harvest, 18,000 at Majdanek alone. That evening, in the officers' mess, he lifted a glass. To efficiency, he toasted. His buddies clinked, but their eyes glanced away. Even monsters have a limit. Children. The mere word turns the stomach. Erich's corruption reached its height here, a disease that stumped even SS psychologists. Yossi Landau, a boy of 10 from Krakow, smuggled out by partisans, testified in broken English at Nuremberg. He'd come for us at night, not the guards, the baker himself. Little ovens need fuel, he'd say, voice like gravel. Grabbed my friend, Leah, 6 years old, by the hair, dragged her kicking to the crematorium. We heard the shot, then the door slam. He came out wiping his hands, humming Lili Marlene. Another, 4 children, ages 4 to 9, taken away in the course of a selection. Erich paraded them past the block, a grotesque uncle. Look, angels for the fatherland. Into the hall they went, swaddled like firewood. To cover up their screams, he revved a truck engine in the street outside, its growl a mechanized lullaby. Turn upon turn. In the hubbub of Erntefest's wreckage, a miracle glimmered. A mother, pretending to be dead amidst the trench's wreckage, shielded her infant daughter under her body. As excavators pushed lime over the heap, the child moved, a gasp, a shriek stifled by the point of a guard's bayonet. But the mother survived, fighting clear under cover of darkness, her escape a strand of light in the fabric of darkness. She made it to partisans, her story powering sabotage raids. Erich had no idea how close his harvest had come to reaping its own uprising. By 1944, Majdanek's flames flickered as the front faltered. May witnessed Erich reassigned to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Reich's horror heart of beating terror. It was here that the magnitude overshadowed Majdanek. 4 crematoria groups, gas chambers consuming 2,000 at a time. Hungarian transports poured in, 437,000 Jews in weeks.
Erich oversaw crematorias 2 and 3, his scar a badge among the Sonderkommando who turned away. Dr. Miklos Niesli, camp-forced pathologist, Hungarian Jew of strength and intellect, often crossed his path. Niesli's memoir, A Knife to the Reich's Belly, exposes the man. Muhsfeldt was no brute automaton. He philosophized over autopsies, dissecting not just flesh, but souls. Killing 1 or 1,000, it's the flour in the loaf, doctor. Measure by weight, not tears. One meeting burned Niesli. The boys of Warsaw, tattered orphans between 10 and 14, driven for labor. Terror at roll call, ran like terrified deer into the barbed maze. Captured, battered, they shook before Erich. Fugitives, he decreed, crop cracking on his boot. To the gas, all. Niesli demurred, veiled, urgent. They are children, Herr Commandant, good workers yet. Erich's laughter was a bark. Workers, vermin beget vermin, burn the nest. That afternoon, the barracks rang with boyish weeping, drowned out by air fans.
But here's the twist that dispels the legend of invincibility. A girl, 16, name forgotten to records. Let us name her Sarah for the sake of her stolen breath. Gassed along with her transport, she came to among the dead, lungs seared from shallow gasps in a crevice corner. Sonderkommando detected her pulse racing. Nitzli hurried, stethoscope shaking. She lives! Oxygen! Liquids! She can be saved! They smuggled her to the infirmary, a thin hope. Erich learned at dinner. He stood, napkin folded like a hangman's noose. A survivor? Out of my ovens? Nitzli begged in the darkened corridor. Mercy, this once, she's no threat. Erich's eyes, pale blue as frost, drilled in. Mercy is Jewish weakness, doctor. Watch. He walked over to the slab where Sarah lay, half conscious, calling for mother. The pistol cracked, a clean hole at the base of the neck. Blood collected like spilled ink. Now, he said, putting away the pistol, the oven takes its due. Auschwitz's collapse was coming. August 1944 hurled Erich to the front. A punishment? A promotion. Wounds arrived quick. Shrapnel from a Soviet barrage ripped his thigh near Warsaw. Evacuated west, he limped into Flossenburg in April 1945, Bavaria's alpine hell. Here brutality was art, granite quarries where men dissolved to skeletons, hauling blocks for Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Roll call stretched to 8 hours, guards betting on who fainted first, losers to the noose. Erich, relegated to block senior, flourished in the anarchy. As Americans approached, the death march commenced. 20,000 prisoners marched west, roads strewn with the dead. Erich's harvest sang, crack on backs, shots for stragglers. Keep moving, swine. 30 he knocked down himself, their bodies snow-dusted memorials. To this, Berlin awarded himself the War Merit Cross Second Class to wear on his tunic, a tin god's gesture to the devil's work. But the Reich collapsed. May 8, 1945, VE Days rumble. Erich in a Flossenburg hayloft was pulled out by GIs, SS runes tattooed on him like a brand. Name, growled the interrogator. Muhsfeldt, he grumbled, chin aloft. Dachau trials threatened, but Poland shouted, his blood on our earth. January 1947, American court at Dachau. Flossenburg witnesses waited in line. A French resistance member to explain the marches. A Czech Jew to relate the beatings in the quarry. Guilty, life. But extradition. Krakow, November 24, 1947. The Auschwitz trial, no, Majdanek's reckoning, was held in a vaulted courtroom, chandeliers casting light like the extinguished stars. Prosecutors, Poles of flint eyes, called forth ghosts. Miriam Goldberg, her jaw taped from reconstruction. Yossi Landau, now a gangly adolescent, voice unshaken as he described the humming.
Nitzli, illegal immigrant from Hungary, his testimony a scalpel. He killed not from orders, but ecstasy. Erich sat captive, his scar of evil in illumination, his defense monotonous, duty to the Führer. Twist. A Polish political prisoner, Jan Kowalski, gave testimony to Erich's pre-war swagger. If you Poles weren't fools, we wouldn't bake you. The court exploded, gasps, clenched fists on benches. Kowalski had fixed his eyes. Now we served the sentence, Baker. December sentence, crimes against humanity, hanging to death. January 24, 1947, Montelupich Prison, Krakau's stone bowels. Dawn crept in through barred slits. Erich, 34, emaciated from Allied scraps, was shaved bald, shame's last snip. Guards escorted him to the room, not trapdoor gallows, but his own creation. Wall hooks, rusty iron teeth from Majdanek's compound. Wooden stool, no higher than a baker's bench. Noose of rough hemp, knotted roughly. Any last words? The warden read. Erich's lips curled, a ghost smile. Heil Hitler. The stool was kicked aside. No drop for snap, intentional. He hung, inches from the floor, weight choking slow. Legs pumped air, bladder emptied in a dark puddle. Gurgling rasps sounded, face bluing to plumb. Minutes seemed to stretch. 2, 3, 5. Eyes bulged out, tongue lolled like a hanged man's joke. Finally, a final spasm, then relaxation. The baker's fire was out. One final irony. No monster's grave. His body, trucked off to Jagiellonian University, ended up as cadavers for med students, scalpel fodder, his scars described in chalkboard diagrams. Greta, burned to ashes in a Dresden bombing, 1945. Little Karl, sent to the Ostfront, lost in snow. No heirs, no weeping. In Majdanek's shoes, Auschwitz's ash, Flossenburg's quarries, the victims speak, remember. Erich Muhsfeld's story is not history's footnote, it's a warning inscribed in bone. If this fire burned you, let it spread. Share, reflect, demand the next uncovering. Which demon next? Speak, and we'll call forth the light.